For most journalists, especially those who are not willing to adapt to technology, life is in some kind of turmoil. And if care is not taken, we can see the effect of technology not only in our life or our lifestyle, but in our pockets. So my standing here today is probably one way of consoling myself that the end is probably not yet near. But if we were to take into account what is happening in the newspaper industry, you will sympathize with me and probably offer a helping hand before the end of today. Now, almost everybody in Nigeria or all over the world today is a journalist. All you need is just a simple gadget, you have a smartphone, and then you become a journalist. And then you generate content. Tragically for the journalist again, that content generated is not even shared vertically alone. It's also shared horizontally. So people have become a community. So the idea of a journalist or an editor or a writer or an information disseminator thinking of himself as occupying some pedestal to which people look is almost dead by now. Everything that they've done since yesterday, I'm sure people have shared among themselves. So anybody who is waiting or who is hoping to sell content based on what has been generated, what has been said here, what has been done here, by tomorrow morning in the Guardian in this day, probably will be speaking to, we will have to look for an audience in the Antarctica. Now, that has presented a major problem for the journalists. According to those who know about those things, let me talk about the effect of the smartphone. The smartphone has become not just a primary access point to the digital world, but the remote control of life itself. From statistics, smartphones alone are already outselling personal computers in the ratio of 5 to 1. And by the year 2020, about 80% of the population of the world will be reached by smartphone. This is the same picture you have in Nigeria. In fact, the experts who have done the appropriate research say the touchless smartphone is less than 10 years old, but every year humanity becomes more addicted and dependent on it. In the UK, Nigeria, United States, more than 1 billion people, people look at their screens more than 1 billion times a day, while almost 60% of the people check their mobile phone within 15 minutes of getting out of bed. Before people even think of the toothbrush or whatever, the first thing most people do, and I'm sure you all will agree with that, is to look at our smartphones. Then, internet penetration may still be low in a place like Nigeria, but we are experiencing absolutely the same thing. So, when people get out of the house, they're already saturated with a lot of information. And then when they stagger out of their houses, they are only wondering what to do with the huge credit of news in their handsets. Now, the Guardian is still on the road, and the vendor is blowing his trumpet or pressing whatever. Meanwhile, the man who is going to buy it is already saturated with information, leaving me almost out of business. So, because of this, the job of a newspaperman or a journalist, whether broadcast or TV or whatever, is getting more and more threatened by the day. It may also not be long before we see the emergence of automated content machines. I've read in some journals about the existence of what called cyber journalists, in which case your systems can have inbuilt applications that can do almost all the researches that you need reporters to do. And there are all kinds of sites, all kinds of applications have been developed to reduce the influence of the trained professional journalists on information gathering and information dissemination. Again, this is part of the disruption that we are experiencing in my profession. Now, in all of this, we need to find out exactly what the role of the journalist or a newspaper person should be. So we have ceased to be the masters of the universe to whom people look for information. We have become people in search of relevance. So what technology, what digital life, what social media has done to the average traditional journalist is to turn him into somebody who is merely looking for relevance. And in order for you to get that relevance, it's very important for you to know what your audience is, or what's the character of the audience, and how you can be relevant to them, or to him, or to her. Blogging. mean, Dr. Abad was just whispering to me about the power of bloggers. Even most of our governments these days, most of the international organizations these days, they probably rely on some of these ladies and gentlemen for dissemination of their ideas and information than they do on the professional journalism. All because you have a smartphone, you have a laptop, you have a small camera, and you're a newspaper house, you're a broadcasting house, you're a TV station, rolled into one. But this is not the end of the world for those of us who are in the traditional media. All we need is to make change our hope. If we can adapt, if we can calibrate our operations in such a way as to make it possible for us to take advantage of some of those things and aggregate them. What we do these days, what you see these days, you see all these bloggers, all these social media, internet publications, aggregating content from all kinds of things. I think it's about newspapers, TV stations like channels, CNN, whatever, which they are already doing, to get the audience involved in the production of content for the consumers. That way, they might be able to find some relevance and at the end of the day, still remain in business. It is time to point out at this point that journalism has always lived on change. Whether we like it or not, change has always been part of our profession. The printing machines evolved over time. All kinds of processes were gone through before we arrive at what we have today. And it's not going to end with what we have today. It's going to evolve even further. Meaning we have a lot more to do in times of learning to adapt to change. Now, if there is something we need to do, is for us to appreciate the fact that the monopoly of the traditional journalism, the traditional newspaper, has been broken. And that can be illustrated by the point I made earlier about how members of the audience, members of the community, citizens of the country, have ceased to be consumers of information or news as we generate it, as we know it. So they have become even creators of that content. And because of that, we who are principally doing information dissemination, gathering dissemination as a business, must appreciate the fact that our monopoly on that line of business is broken. It's now left for us to find a way to remain important to those people who on their own can generate the content, share it among themselves, even before you can send it to them, and then pay for it at the end of the day. And I'm sure most of my colleagues who are on the social media, who are on the internet newspapers, will admit today that perhaps the major challenge that they have is getting people to pay for some of those things that they will generate as content. Those of us in the newspaper business, TV, radio, and traditional media, we are still able to generate about 77% of the income from adverts still go to traditional media. But that is not going to last for too long. As you can see, costs are being cut in every newspaper house now. It's a miracle I'm still here talking, and it's a miracle many of my colleagues are still in business because the traditional media houses are getting into the change environment and trying to adapt to the environment at the moment. So they are reducing the number of persons. You don't really need all the outposts that we used to have in those days. You had correspondence in Paranaboda, you had in Nguru, you had in Kanaku. Nobody does that anymore because with a touch of the spirit, somebody somewhere can give information from that place. You don't need to maintain an office. You don't even need to buy a van to start going all the way to those places. So it's a very, very tough environment for everybody now. And jobs are going to be lost. And it's one of the reasons why today it's on record that one of the least attractive professions in the world is journalism, because everybody has suddenly become a journalist since they can generate content and disseminate same. However, if I may cut this very short, what is going to keep us in business? What is going to make it possible for the average newspaper person, TV journalist, or radio journalist to remain in business, get information disseminated, and get paid for it? Content is the king. The only way you can remain relevant, the only way you can make your information, your news, relevant to the audience is its uniqueness. If what you are going to send out is what people already know among themselves, it's only a matter of time before you go out of business. So, content is king, and whether you are in the newspaper business, whether you're on TV, whether you're on radio, whether you're a blogger, whether you publish an online newspaper, if your content is not unique, you are not likely to retain your audience for too long. Now, we must wake up to the reality again of the depreciating value of our currency, the depression of our economy in Nigeria, and the fact that everybody prioritizes now. So the last thing on most people's mind now is information or news, especially the routine one. If you are going to tell me that Luton House is located on Abakar-Oshodi Expressway according to sources, you're not going to be business. If you are going to publish that MUSON Centre according to sources is on Lagos Island, you are not telling me anything. Recycling information, telling people what they already know, or dressing ordinary information in fine prose is not going to help you. You need to generate unique content and disseminate it uniquely on whatever platform you are using at all. That's as far as the disruption that the technology development in the world has brought to the newspaper and journalism business. But then, we have arrived at a new dawn, what I call the new dawn. And what is this new dawn? It is to say, we must program our minds, whether as citizens or whether as information managers or disseminators, we must program our minds to the changing world of information technology. We cannot run away from it. Somebody was saying when I got in here that nobody ever knew that a day will come in this country where you will actually do purchases. Even 10 years ago, we didn't know the cars were going to work in Nigeria. We didn't know there was going to get a number of things. Nobody knew there was Ponga, there was Jovia, there was Yanibaba. Nobody knew all of those things. Nobody even knew, nobody imagined that at the click of this device, I could get to know what is happening all over the world. Now, if that will happen within a space of 10 years, you can imagine what may also happen in the next 5-6 years. Against this background, here are some realities we have to live with. Traditional media, especially print, are shrinking, even though they still make use of the publication revenues, industry's revenue. And that's why, as I said earlier, I still have a job. But today, digital, online, they are making very little. It's not going to be like this forever. There is going to be a design someday. Maybe my brother over there is going to make it work for us, make more money online than we do today. But we must recognize one thing. This is something that I think all of us should pay attention to. That is the smartphone. The smartphone, from the statistics that are available, it is very important for us to appreciate the fact that most of the news that people are going to consume will be on this.